Okay, let's bring up our next speakers then. Could you give a big hand, please, to Rob? They're going to two-hand them. We're going to start off with Donald Fowler. Oh, I don't know, something you said, Donald, but half the audience is leaving. Donald Fowler from the Premex Group. Big hand, please.
It is quite interesting. Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Donald Fowler, and I'm Managing Director of Premex Services. And Stuart and I, Stuart Sheehy from Premier Medical, are going to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about a highly topical subject, which is the delivery of medical evidence in the modern era, and specifically the diagnosis of whiplash. We're obviously going to dispel some of the dreadfully unhelpful myths that are out there just now about the delivery of evidence in the modern era, being pushed by a number of individuals and institutions on a very regular basis. And then finally going to wrap up with some highly relevant and exciting news about what we're doing to ensure that medical evidence does remain beyond question. It might seem a little unusual for Stuart Sheehy from Premier and I to share a podium. For those of you who know us, we're massive competitors and have been for a long time. I don't know what we're the equivalent of, Stuart, to be the Ferguson and Mancini of the medical evidence world. I don't know. I know that I'm better looking than Ferguson. I don't think you're better looking than Mancini. The reason that we are standing together on the stage today is that our two organisations will deliver probably in the region of 350,000 medical reports, which represents almost half of the entire medical evidence in the personal injury market. Now, the reason that is important is that policymakers need to be absolutely clear that our delivery of medical evidence is entirely independent, is cost efficient, is delivered by highly qualified NHS practitioners, and importantly, is an absolute world apart from the frustratingly slow process that existed in this area prior to our organisations driving efficiencies into the process. The fact that we are actually instructed to obtain medical evidence by all sides of the industry, and that's insurers on defendant work, insurers doing intervention or capture work, the Motor Insurers Bureau, and the claimant side, is clear evidence that our process is identical across the board. Further, we find that the government suggestions, whilst we actually endorse them wholeheartedly, the topical government suggestions that we should actually find some independent panels to provide the medical evidence is somewhat strange, because that's exactly what we do now. No one has sought to come and visit us to actually verify our independence. Nobody's visited us to actually explore the crucial part that we play in the process, and nobody from the government has certainly come and examined what cost efficiencies we've driven into the process. Further, it's exactly what we do is the independent element. We are the independent buffer between a claimant solicitor or an insurer and the medical expert. Further, when an expert has been instructed by Premex or Premier or indeed any of the other agencies in the audience, that expert is receiving instruction from the agency. And because the agency has a number of clients, that expert is actually being instructed by somebody over there. The agency is a direct link, and he cannot be said to be relying on a flow of instructions from a small number or even a single expert, so a single solicitor, that the cynic would say he needs to keep happy, which is clearly one of the underlying arguments behind the independence or lack of independence point. A further point that has us scratching our heads is that at the same time as there are bold calls that it is an absolute necessity for more robust medical evidence to stamp out the frivolous and the fraudulent whiplash claims, those calls are coming from the very same people and the very same organisations that have no problem with the concept of settling a PI claim with absolutely no medical evidence. And we find that a slightly hard set of positions to reconcile. Of course, it would be naive to suggest that there are no bad apples in the medical evidence barrel, and bad apple in this context could be the crucial independence argument. It could be the fact that charging way above what standard market rates are, or indeed it could be an honesty and integrity point. But in recognising that fact, it's absolutely crucial for us to really make the point that we must not and should not hold up the behaviours of a very, very small minority as being representative of how an entire industry operates. Whiplash is clearly a very hot topic just now. And only last week I attended the Lyons-Davidson 3-day conference in Bristol, where a huge range of international speakers were on show. Once again the ABI spoke, and once again they were unable to say the word whiplash without it being very closely followed by fraudulent and exaggerated. In addition, at the end of day 2, a day in which a number of global leading experts on the subject, specifically about the effect of a whiplash-type mechanism on the neck at relatively low speeds, and they spoke all through the day. Jack Straw did his now stock piece at the end of the day and basically confirmed what he said, his now infamous comment in the Commons, and said that whiplash frankly doesn't exist, and if you have suffered a whiplash-type injury, take 2 paracetamol and carry on with your life. Well, the latest scientific research, including that presented at the Lyons-Davidson conference, would seem to suggest very strongly that the notion that whiplash injuries can and do occur, and they are certainly not a figment of the imagination, are actually, frankly, inaccurate. And I found it very interesting to hear Mike Brockman speak this morning as an insurer, because Mike was at the conference as well, and he said that he came away from the conference looking at that scientific evidence, feeling the same way. The problem that we face, sorry, I've got some water over me here. The problem that we face is that whiplash has become synonymous with fraud, rather than being accepted as a mechanism of injury that can and does cause injury across a whole spectrum of severity. That said, it is also widely accepted that it is notoriously difficult to prove, or importantly disprove, that the existence of a whiplash injury due to the current absence of any definitive test, blood test, scan, whatever it is, that can categorically corroborate or refute such diagnosis. My view is that it is the fact that the diagnosis of whiplash is as much an art as it is a science that is what really concerns the insurance industry. And whilst I understand the concern, and a definitive black and white objective test would be a fantastic place to get to, and indeed a laudable place to demand that we get to, such a thing on a cost-effective and practical basis does actually seem an awful long way off. But what I think is completely wrong is, in the absence of any such test or scan, is we jump to the current default unsatisfactory position where any doctor who states that on the balance of probabilities, on the basis of their clinical experience, and having listened to the claimant's described symptoms and injuries, they state that in their opinion it is consistent with the whiplash-type injury diagnosed, that having given that opinion, that expert is automatically assumed to have been hoodwinked by a fraudulent claimant. In my view, there's a real danger that 2 big issues are being confused here. How injured a claimant needs to be before compensation is payable is one thing, that's a legal point, and there's lots of people far more educated than me to debate that point. However, whether a claimant is injured or not is an entirely medical issue, and it is certainly not for a solicitor, an insurer, the ABI, or any individual high-level politician to say whether a claimant can or cannot be injured at relatively low speeds, especially when you see the wealth of scientific and medical evidence that is out there. In the same vein, I must stress it is not the doctor's job to actually say whether he feels compensation should be payable. His role is very, very clear, and that is to provide a professional opinion regarding whether, in his professional opinion, on the balance of probabilities, it all stacks up together. In the absence of any such desired test or scan, we, and that is both Stuart and I on behalf of our organisations, do believe that suitably trained, independent, qualified, professional expert witnesses are without question the best people to assess the medical opinions required in these cases. There is simply no sound argument against this point. The assessment of a physical injury, which often has a consequential psychological impact, is for a medical expert to deliver. It is right that this independent opinion currently sits at the heart of the process, and it is right that it remains so. There is no doubt that the medical evidence process has become somewhat streamlined over the past few years, and this streamlining is sometimes linked with a suggested deterioration in quality. The expression I hear is that the medical evidence process has become too dumbed down. But again, the key elements of the streamlining have been driven by both the claimant solicitors and the insurer world. Claimant solicitors looking for a very fast turnaround in report times, the insurance industry clearly looking for a reduction in the cost base. Examples of industry-driven streamlining are the shift to predominantly GP reports, the acceptance that a review of a claimant's medical notes is not required in the vast majority of GP cases, and the use of electronic report writing tools with a resultant standardised appearance, which I know is a bugbear of many insurers. but these facilitate electronic transfer of medical evidence, and as we progress, the electronic integration of that evidence with the quantum valuation tools such as COA and Colossus. If this has gone too far in some people's minds, we are more than happy to engage in a meaningful debate and discussion about what needs to be done, what retrograde steps maybe we have to take, but we need to be clear that the current medical evidence process has been shaped to a massive extent by the key stakeholders in the current industry. As mentioned at the start, a large proportion of the medical evidence used in PI cases is actually sourced through a very small number of key agencies in the market, such as Premex and Premier. I'm not going to spend any time explaining the background to the MRO market or the range of benefits that MROs have brought to the claims process, be that from a cost, a content, or whatever perspective. I think this is a suitably educated audience not to go into that. But suffice to say that the MRO model was something that Lord Justice Jackson did review in his report, and he did comment on, and you can see it up behind me there. Having considered the evidence with the assistance of my assessors, I am persuaded that the intervention of MROs has had the overall effect of controlling the costs of obtaining medical evidence in personal injury cases. Signed, Donald Fowler. Okay, I'd now like to spend 5 minutes dispelling. I'd like to spend 5 minutes dispelling some of the dreadfully unhelpful myths that are flying around the market just now, and it's one of these cases where don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Myth number 1, doctors are in the pay of claims management companies and solicitors. Well, following the Wolf reforms in the late 90s, one of the key roles that we play in the current system is that independent buffer that I've already referred to. The buffer between the claimant solicitor or the instructing insurer and the medical expert. It is also safe to say that the current process using an independent panel of doctors is most certainly a huge step forward from the hugely partisan hired gun approach of the pre-Wolf days. Further, we operate a single panel of experts and instruct the same panel of doctors regardless of whether our client is an insurer or a solicitor. We use an identical process to both sides of the industry. And it is clear to us that this would not be accepted by either side of the industry if these claims of partisanship were indeed accurate. Myth number 2, doctors' income is dependent upon the success of a case. Well, this one is very straightforward. We operate fixed credit terms with our expert panel, allowing us to pay them significantly in advance of when we recover our invoice value from at the end of the case. And let me be 100% clear here, we have no arrangements whereby any of our experts get paid only if the case succeeds. Our experts are paid win, lose or draw. This is a deliberate practice on our part and a key element in us actually demonstrating the all-important independence test. Myth number 3, doctors simply write what the claimant tells them. Well, GPs in clinical practice spend their entire careers caring for patients over a prolonged period of time, during which they will witness and treat a whole range of injuries and illnesses from onset or injury right through hopefully to recovery. It is this experience that the doctors deploy in the medical legal context and their assessment of a personal injury claimant. Their assessment is essentially of one of, does it all fit together, being the claimant's demeanour, their history, the accident details described, and importantly, the resultant injuries and symptoms described, including the impact or stated impact on their life. This is a huge amount more than simply writing down what a claimant tells them. Also, please let's not lose sight of the fact that each expert signs a statement of truth at the end of each report. Each report is addressed to the court, and that expert knows that he may be called up in front of the court to answer questions on the report itself. Myth number 4, doctors simply rubber stamp extended prognosis periods for the minor injuries. I think we all know that extreme cases are used to illustrate the general point being made regarding whiplash. And once again, it is very important that we understand the reality. Only last week I was speaking to a senior insurance individual, and his exact words to me when we were discussing the whole whiplash evidence, objectivity, independence point, his exact words were, it's the frequency of the £4,000 damages claims for the 1 mile an hour supermarket car park bump that is the real issue. Well, if that is a real issue, which I don't believe it is, but if that is a real issue, those claims in a 1 mile an hour accident are being supported to the tune of a £4,000 damages claim by medical evidence. Now, there are clear guidelines used by the entire industry, both claimant and defendant, regarding the injury sustained and what quantum is payable on the back of that. But many of you in this room will know that for a £4,000 quantum general damages, you're looking at a severe injury, multiple site injury, or single site with probably an 18-month plus prognosis period. And I can put this firmly into context for you, as we have analysed over 50,000 GP reports from June 09 right through to July 11, and the results paint a very clear picture, and one that shows that our independent panel see a huge range of injuries of varying severities, with the prognoses for recovery ranging from 0 to 3 months right through to more protracted periods. And we can be confident that accidents and prognosis periods such as the one supposedly at the heart of the issue, the £4,000 claim for the 1 mile an hour accident, are simply not as commonplace as some would have you believe. You can see the statistics behind me. Less than 75% of those 50,000 test sample had prognosis period of less than 9 months. Only 3% had prognosis period of over 18 months. So if I refer you back to this frequent or commonplace injury and resultant damages, you can see it's simply not commonplace. Finally, medical evidence is provided by third-rate doctors. Well, clearly we disagree with this statement on every level, but I'd now like to hand over to Stuart, who's going to talk you through the measures that we take, both Premex and Premier, to ensure that our medical evidence provided is beyond question and continues to improve.
In the medical industry, my background is with Bupa, so I've spent a long time working with Bupa, so I understand the medical industry, but less so the motor insurance industry. So it's been really, really interesting to come into the industry. And I must admit, when I first joined Premier, I was perhaps a little bit cocky, thought, you know, medical legal reporting, how hard can that be? Little did I realise that I'd come into pretty much a firestorm industry, changing sort of right, left and centre, and really the whole world seems to be changing in terms of referral fees, ABS, etc., and the political firestorm that seems to have ignited over whiplash claims, which is all perhaps a little bit strange, really, when you realise that most of that comment is coming actually from politicians who, shall we say, straw men. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the medical recruitment process, but more importantly, showcase an important new development that both Premex and ourselves at Premier have pulled together to try and face up to this issue head on. It's really quite strange to be taking a stand with your largest competitor and in front of an audience, but it actually sort of says something about our reaction and the fact that some of the comment that have been made really needs to be put straight, because really it is a long way short of the mark. So a little bit on the current position at the moment. So we both operate effectively very similar processes, really, and it's not, the recruitment process for GPs is not really business people recruiting doctors. All of our organisations employ a multitude of doctors, and they are the people that really are at the heart of the recruitment process. So we will take CVs and check GMC registrations, CRB checks, etc. on all of our doctors to ensure that all of their registrations are up to date and there are no issues around that. We will do interviews if appropriate, and often the process involves nominations being put to our legal partners, and it's often the solicitor that will make that choice from a series of doctors. We obviously help the doctors with the process that they're required to do, and providing them with the civil procedure rules, etc., and also the IT so that the process works properly. We have formal contracts with every single doctor we have, and all of those contracts have SLAs in and sanction processes, such that if they are not up to scratch, whether that be in the reporting process, the diagnosis process, or to some extent orthopaedic surgeons, God forbid, in their bedside manner, that there is a process of actually taking them off of this. And some of our customers are always very, very interested in doctors that have been taken off our list. They clearly don't want to have reports that are prepared by them. And we apply those SLAs very, very stringently. In many respects, the system, although there are those checks and balances in the process, it is very much self-regulating. The good doctors, the doctors that have great experiences with the client and that provide great reports tend to get the work, and they will get the bulk of the work. The doctors that provide poor reports or that do have a poor bedside manner that we get complaints on, and then that our solicitor partners get complaints on, won't get used again. It's reasonably simple, and it does self-regulate in that way. Donald alluded to this to some extent. I was at Lyons Davidson conference last week myself, and one of the doctors was asking questions and stood up and saying, "Yes, we've dumbed it down. We've made it into a tick box process." I think Contrary to that, we've made it very fast, we've made it very efficient. We perhaps sometimes have gone a little bit too far in terms of our clinic model, in terms of making the reporting process quite sharp and quite slick, and we want to ensure that the time the doctor spends with the client is sufficient for him to make a proper diagnosis. Sometimes some of the doctors can be very, very quick on the draw, and sometimes you have to pick them up if they are taking too short a time with the client. Both of our software packages make this process very quick, and it also applies a certain level of quality control process to the process. So our Warp software collects all of the evidence, all the administrative details of the client, but also all the accident details as well, and that's done separately on a touchscreen computer in a clinic setting, but not with the doctor. So then subsequently, when the client gets in front of the doctor's spending all of his time looking at the injuries that the clients have sustained, not going through all of the details and filling forms in, because it's all already there. So it makes the process very, very quick, and that helps drive the cost of this process down. I think it's important to remember sometimes we get this sort of PR of this slightly wrong, and the client sometimes expects that it's a sort of full medical examination that should take a long time. In reality, it's clearly a medical assessment to assess the injuries that the client sustained. So it really does need to be fairly focused on what the injuries are. Clearly, if that's relatively minor, that can be done relatively quickly. If it's major trauma, then that's a much longer process. So what's our answer? What we intend to launch a little bit later this year is the certificate in medical legal reporting. So what we want to do is answer the question about the desire for objective medical evidence that the experts have got the required level of knowledge to assess each of the clients that they see. Now we kind of think that this is there now, but with great debate about whiplash, there's a lot of the LD conference 3 days worth, which is kind of, when I came to this, astonished that you could have a 3-day conference on whiplash, but it just shows that the level of information analysis that is there, and I was staggered at the level of detail that some of the medical experts can get into to assess a patient. So this is to pull together a receptacle which has got all of the latest evidence, all of the latest thinking, and actually make that available to our panel, so that they've got that and they can make the best possible assessment of the client that's in front of them. We'll also be a little bit more on the civil procedure rules to make sure that the expert is actually addressing all of the points that are required in that. This will be done through an e-learning module and through Capital Learning and Development. This will all be put on a website, and the site effectively made available to doctors through links. And all the relevant articles and guidance will be enclosed on there. And what we'll do subsequently is produce an online questionnaire which just gives us sufficient evidence that the expert has got the right level of understanding of the issues and the concepts that are contained in the literature and in the articles. And we see this as a major benefit to what we're doing now. This obviously provides the experts with all of the information. So an expert, they're busy people, they're seeing patients most of the time. They don't often have a lot of time to sit and actually spend a bit of time doing a bit of background research in the area that they think they know more about, but there's more evidence available. So this actually provides them with the most available evidence that there is in the industry. It can help identify training needs, and that both for them and for us, and we expect to have a fairly open and clear dialogue with the experts about what's required and what they may be lacking on. But the evidence that this will produce will be objective, and we will retain it, and it'll be available to clients if necessary. But I think the benefit really will be to the client and to our customers. So this will produce right reports right first time. So the expert will know some of the nuances that they're looking for, some of the subtleties in the patient's symptoms that they're looking for, and we'll be able to get the sort of synopsis of that situation right first time, and therefore should reduce the number of questions that we might get asked by a solicitor to assess whether the actual case is being assessed properly. So we'll expect this to really reduce cycle times overall, and particularly the questions that we often get back. So what next? So the latest launch date we think will be the 1st of September. We probably are ready to go earlier, but we probably wouldn't want to launch through the summer period. Initially, we wouldn't make this mandatory. We need to consult with our experts and make sure this is hitting the mark, but equally, what's the point in doing it if it's not mandatory? So we'll go through a process of discussing it with them, making sure they've got the right information, making sure the assessment process we've got is absolutely spot on. But ultimately, there's no point in doing it if it won't be mandatory. We'd expect it to be adopted by both of our panels of experts fairly readily, to be honest. Obviously this is focused primarily at the moment on whiplash, but we would expect that through dialogue with our experts that this might well be expanded into other areas where the objective evidence of injuries is perhaps difficult to assess, and therefore we need more information and to actually help the doctors to produce more standardised responses to particular situations that they see. And all of those modules will be developed collaboratively with all parties, both our customers and the experts themselves. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your attention.